The Clarks decided to finish their basement to provide play space for their children. They wanted a stair railing that would be attractive as well as sturdy. A solid hardwood railing is the answer. Start by capping the framing with a trim board. Measure the wall and add 3/4 of an inch for both sides. This additional space provides room for a trim board to have a reveal at the edge. For a 2x4 wall, cut a 1x8 down to 6 or 6 1/4 inches. Cut the vertical piece first. Make it slightly longer than needed to provide room for fitting. On this project, the landing required the board to be notched. With the board on the floor, mark the horizontal plane of the offset. Measure in from the framing to determine the location of the vertical cut. Transfer the measurement to the piece, marking carefully to avoid error. Remind yourself which piece is waste to eliminate confusion at the saw. Cut carefully so that you don't overcut the face of the board. I'm comfortable using my compound miter saw to make this cut, but a jigsaw or a coping saw offer more control. To determine the length of the vertical cap board, place a piece of scrap the same thickness on the wall. Run a straight edge across the top and mark where the cap and the edge intersect. This is the long point of the bevel cut. Bisect the angle to determine the bevel required, in this case 24.5 degrees. Use a scrap piece to verify the angle. A shallow cut across the face, followed by a full cut into the board, eliminate chipping of the finished edge. Use glue to permanently anchor the cap board to the framing. Set it in place and nail the bottom. Plumb the piece carefully. The newel post will attach to it. Use 2.5-inch gun nails or 8 penny nails if you're hand nailing. Before you cut the top piece to length, determine the exact angle of the bevel cut with a piece of scrap. Fit it carefully, adjusting your saw angle and recutting until the joint on the scrap piece is perfect. Then, cut the same angle on the finished piece. Use glue to secure the beveled joint. Glue the cap rail to the framing as well. Fit the top of the piece to the wall above. This piece is notched to slide past the wall several inches. Nail the board, keeping in mind that the bottom rail will cover any nail holes near the center. If you cut both pieces from the same board, you'll get good grain match. Lightly sand the joint with 100 grit paper. To set the newel post, find center on the cap board and mark the newel width. This post is 3.5 inches wide, and it will have to be notched for the stair landing. Most codes require the handrail to be between 32 and 38 inches from the plane of the stair. Accordingly, set the newel post to its proper height and mark the bottom of the post on the cap board. Mark the notch width on the newel and cut out the waste. Mark all sides of the post, including the bottom, to make the location of your notch easy to identify. I regularly use my compound miter for this cut, but a handsaw, jigsaw, or circular saw will also do the job. Because of the travel of the saw blade, you'll either have to turn the newel over and cut from the other side, or finish the cut with a handsaw. Remember, we raised the blade guard for visual clarity while making this video. Never compromise your saw's safety features. Tap the waste piece firmly with your hammer. It will break loose easily. Clean up the inside of the cut with a chisel. Any wood left here will prohibit a tight fit to the landing. The newel is now ready to be set in place. Fit it to your notch, then check it for level. It is imperative that the post be installed plumb in both directions. Since the vertical cap board was carefully plumbed, the post should fit tightly to it over the entire length of the seam. Drill recessed holes for your screws using a 3/8 inch spade bit. Then, drill a pilot hole for the first screw. The recessed hole allows the 3-inch screws to anchor at least 1.5 inches into the framing. Use a long driver tip to install the first screw. Check the post for level and make any adjustments now before installing the second screw. Measure for the remaining holes. Use at least 6 screws to hold the newel securely. Place the holes symmetrically near the bottom, center, and top of the cap board. Then drill a hole through the post just larger than the screw to ensure that the post will draw up tight to the cap. Mark the depth with a piece of tape so you don't over-drill. Then install the remaining screws. The newel is tight to the wall, but remember, your newel post will only be as strong as the wall it's attached to. Cut the bottom rail using scrap blocks to find the correct angle. Give yourself an extra 1/4 inch in order to fit it at the top. Square off the cap board where it meets the wall to find the exact length of the rail. Test fit this angle as well. Don't assume that the top and bottom angles will be identical. Sneak up on the cut, taking off a little at a time rather than cutting it too short trying to get it perfect the first time. Repeat the procedure until you have an excellent fit. Nailing will compress the drywall slightly to make an invisible joint. Nail every 10 to 12 inches with a 2.5 inch nail. Use the same angles to cut the top rail as you did to cut the bottom. Determine the length of your piece by placing it on the bottom rail and marking at the wall. Cut the rail to length, giving yourself an extra 1/16 of an inch to fit the joint. If both the post and wall are perfectly plumb, the exact length of the bottom rail will work for the top rail. Center the bottom of the rail to the top of the newel post, letting the top rest against the wall. Mark the bottom side of the rail where it meets the post. A nail set to this mark will act as an extra pair of hands to hold the rail in place while you fit the top. The top and bottom rails should be parallel to each other. We made a rosette, routing the edges for interest to dress up the joint at the wall. Turn the rosette over and use it as a guide to mark the wall plane on the rail. Use those marks to set your angle and make your cut. A compound miter saw is the perfect tool for accurate cuts on stock this size. Tack the rosette to the wall and fit the rail to it. When you're satisfied with the fit of all the joints, install the rosette permanently using 2.5 inch nails. Now you're ready to install the top rail. Cover the entire surface of the joint with glue. Then, set the bottom of the rail on the nail at the newel post. Lay the top against the rosette. Clean the excess glue. Then, nail this joint. Next, remove the nail on the post. Attach the rail to the newel with glue and nails. For added strength, countersink and install a 3-inch screw. On rails over 8 feet, use a 3.5 inch lag bolt. The fillet strip will cover the holes. Glue in 3/8 inch color-matched plugs to fill the holes on the post. Tap the plugs flush with the board rather than your hammer to ensure that the plug faces are not recessed. Sand the face of the post using an orbital sander with 120 grit paper. If you hand sand, mount the sandpaper on a wood block to keep the surface flat. Measure the height of the baluster at the post. Remember that it's difficult to get your tape in here, so approximate the placement and make the first cut slightly long. The turning on the baluster should be centered between the cut ends. To accomplish this, mark a center line on the square portion of the baluster at both ends. Lay your tape on the baluster, centering your overall measurement over the turn portion. When the length of the square portions are equal, mark the center line at both ends. Set your speed square to the cutting angle, in this case 41 degrees. Mark this angle where your baluster length intersects the center line. Then make your cuts. Test fit your piece and make adjustments as needed. Make sure the baluster is seated fully at the bottom rail. Slightly short is better than slightly long. Remember to test fit the baluster at the top of the railing. Use a level to ensure that it's plumb. Use this baluster as a pattern to mark the others. Carefully line up the turnings for best results. Use only a sharp pencil or knife blade to mark the cut line. Now, line up your mark carefully and set a stop block on the fence of your saw to make this first cut. This guarantees consistent results. Time now to install the balusters. Building codes require baluster spacing that will not allow a 4-inch sphere to pass between them here at their widest point. And they should be evenly positioned between the newel post and the wall. There's a complicated mathematical formula for determining baluster positioning, but there's also a simpler method using a pair of 6-inch dividers. With a little trial and error, you'll have the proper positioning in no time. Begin by setting one of the balusters in place, approximately 3.5 inches from the newel post. Place one divider point at the post and the other on the outer edge of the baluster. This will provide the maximum spacing between balusters allowed by most codes. The divider points must never be farther apart than they are now. Rotate the points of the divider over again and again until you reach the top of the railing. Repeat this operation and keep narrowing the divider legs until the final point of the divider is 1 baluster width past the end of the wall. It may take several tries, but once this positioning is achieved, you'll be assured that your balusters will fit perfectly in the railing. Then, just install the top edge of each baluster on your final divider point markings. Cut a long piece of fillet on one end and place it in the rail. Mark the fillet at the inside edge of the baluster location. Gang cut the ends of several fillet pieces. Then add the piece you just marked. Line up the mark with your saw blade and gang cut the pieces. A stop block can be used here as well. Glue and nail the first fillet piece at the bottom. Pin nails are effective and leave the smallest hole. Install the top fillet next, being careful to ensure that the fillet seats up tight against the rail. Tap it tight to the post. If this piece is off, everything else will be too. Then nail it in place. Remove any debris on the ends of the balusters before setting them in place against the fillet. Make certain this one is plumb before you go any further. Glue both ends and watch for squeeze out. Verify that the baluster is seated in the track at the bottom and tight to the fillet at the top. Nail it in using a 2-inch nail for strength. Nail high enough so that the holes are covered by the next piece of fillet. Install the remaining balusters the same way. Cut the last piece to fill the remaining distance. If you're really good or just plain lucky, no cutting is needed. Even for professionals, this rarely happens. Always use a block when hammering to eliminate denting the finished piece. Cut a slightly steeper angle here to ensure the top of the fillet makes contact with the drywall. This joint is more visible. To finish the rail, use a piece of base molding or other trim to cover the gap between the rail and the wall. Nail it every 12 inches with a 2 to 2.5 inch nail. You can see how the reveal above the molding gives a nice finished appearance. We also ran base molding at the bottom of the post to cover the gap there. Wood blocks cut to size back out the molding. The rail is complete and ready for finishing. Use a quality stain and 2 coats of finish to keep your solid wood rail looking beautiful for years.